It's the State of Grace Forum. Welcome. I think our agenda begins with Sally. Are you going to open us up by talking about a little bit about vestry? Or is this a surprise? So we have a wonderful and energetic vestry. We have for many years. One of our wonderful and energetic members is none other than Sally Fraser.
Well, there's a lot to say about vestry, but I guess I've been a member here at Grace since 1990, and this is the first time I've ever served on vestry. I thought, first of all, it would probably take up too much time. It's probably too hard. It was probably lots of reasons that I didn't do it. But I'm very glad I have. I met absolutely wonderful people. Martin talked about the joy of meeting people in community here at Grace, and the vestry is certainly one way to do that. We meet wonderful people that are really committed to trying to make this a better community and do it in a really joyful, collaborative way. It's a wonderful experience, and I encourage people that have thought about it or are interested in, seeing the community go forward, and even maybe have plans or things that they'd like to see happen, or encourage them to happen in a faster or better way to get involved, or if you just want to kind of be part of something that's exciting and actually fun, surprisingly. So anyway, it's been a privilege to be part of the vestry here, and I encourage people to be interested in doing it. Thank you.
If you're following Grace Notes, you will have noticed considerable unplanned changeover in the office. Some sad news. I think both Chris and Anson are navigating really pretty significant griefs, and have discerned that they want to focus on taking care of themselves right now. So they go forth with our love. They both want to stay in touch with the Grace community, and we are glad for that. Speaking of vestry, we're deep into a search for a parish manager. Already, actually, a couple of very promising candidates have surfaced. Once we get a parish manager in place, part of what we'll ask that person to do is to work with us on the question of keeping the books, rather than handing the parish manager a system that they then need to live with, or an employee they need to live with. We're going to let them take some leadership on that front. So come by if you're able in this coming week to say farewell to Chris and say thank you to her. I know that means a great deal. I think our major agenda item is an exciting one, which is periodically we've been talking for quite some time about a development project at Grace. Depending on who you ask, like when that gets started goes further and further back in time. I think we were guessing as early as 2006, this community might have been talking about a master plan. But in many ways, as Father Stephen talked about, you may remember the video he recorded for the gala, this is a question that we've been talking about since 1906, which is how is this place going to be a gift to the community? Stephen highlighted that old school word parish, which doesn't just mean the building or the people in here, but a parish is a geographical area that we serve. And I think part of the genius of Grace is it's really gotten that across the years, that we have a duty to the neighborhood. Gang, let's cut down on running. Hey, Timothy. I think you've actually already been asked about this, right? About not running, because I'm just nervous about somebody getting knocked over, and that would not be a happy ending to our time together. So this plan is part of deepening the way in which Grace is a gift to the community. Somebody, periodically, Nancy, someone will say, "Is this project still happening?" And it very much is still happening. I think the advice we've gotten is a project like this goes inconceivably slowly, and then once it starts, you won't believe how fast it moves. So we're at a really cool hinge point, and Nancy and Patty, would you like to talk a little bit about?
I would like to introduce Patty.
Okay, excellent, please. Here's Nancy Entrican.
So hi everybody. It probably seems like we've all gone into hibernation for a year or so since FAME backed out of the project, and not everybody feels this way, but I think that was the best thing that could have happened because it's gotten a lot more simple. We never figured out how we were all going to work together. It was incredibly complicated trying to work this out with 3 different entities. So now we're kind of in control of our own destiny. Patty's been on this off and on for years, and I've kind of kept in touch with Patty. And I said, when we get close to something, I want you to come in and help us sell the project. And Patty, if you don't know him that well, he is a recently retired principal from Zimmer Gunsel Frasca, which is the firm that's redoing the airport, and that's going to be a really fabulous design when they get done with that. He kind of moves between Portland and Bath, England, and he's he's well known worldwide in his look into the future, to planning cities of the future, and he's just offers so much. And here at the end, we really need that. So Patty? He also sailed around the world once.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Star billing is not a good way to start any presentation, but thank you very much. As Martin and Nancy have both said, this has been going on for a very long time. We've gone through many different iterations of how we could really optimize use of the church campus without compromising in any way what Grace Institute does, what the church does. And so that's a challenge in itself. But the second one is, what good can we do with what we've got? And I think that we are finally at a position where we have a simple, straightforward idea that will really work well. However, I would say that any project, and I've taken many to more raucous audiences than this one, to try and explain why what we're proposing is a good idea. And almost universally, there are 2 problems. One is building height, and the other one is parking. Everyone in the room I know is an expert on parking. You've all done it before. And there are, we've inherited from about a century ago this absolute infatuation with the automobile, which meant that it could do anything it darn well pleased. So, for example, the term jaywalker, which is like country bumpkin 100 years ago, it was something that motorists would shout at people on foot because it wouldn't get out of the way. And so extreme was the infatuation that it actually became a crime, and you can get fined for it. I mean, it really shows how completely we went overboard for cars. One of the consequences of that is that people feel they have a right to keep their bit of private equipment, their car, in the street. Now, we built the street on public money, we maintain it on public money. Why do you have a right to keep your car there? We do it because the space is there, and it's a privilege. It's exactly that. A now famous mayor in Spain said, would you be allowed to keep a refrigerator there? Or a cow? It's the same principle. It's really not something that is a right, but it's something we've become accustomed to. And through that, we've come accustomed to the idea that we should always have convenient parking available to us. Well, that's not always the case. And it's not always essential either. There are many well-attended churches that have no parking whatsoever. We find ways to deal with that problem. So that's something that I think we needed to understand. And it was a difficult lesson to learn, that parking should not be the tail that wags the dog here, that we'll do what we can, but there are other things that are actually more important. Building height is the other one, and the height of buildings allowed is something, as you know, which is controlled through zoning and is updated from time to time. And the prevailing height of the newer buildings around here give you an idea of what that looks like. Slightly taller than the church roof perhaps, but not much, and that's about what we go to. So the next thing to think about is, if you have a building of that scale nearby, how do we minimize the obstruction of the sun? How do we make sure that we have the proper daylight we need in the courtyard here and in any other open space we have? And another thought, which is I think a very important one, is how do we contain is perhaps the wrong word, but keep safety, or keep safely all the kids who are here at art camp. We don't want them dashing out into the street. We don't want odd people wandering into the midst of things either. So there needs to be some security, but not hurricane fences. We want invisible security, if you like, so that the planning of the campus is such that people are quite safe without it looking like we've got a security company looking after us all. So those are a couple of sort of beginning things. When we looked at most recently at 3 alternatives, and we found that only one of them really fulfilled all of these things. Another thing that it did was to keep all of the Grace Institute functions on what retailers would call the 100% corner. When you travel wider one way, as you know, then the corner that you see is the back of the church, presumably because that part of the property was not available in 1906, and so the church had to be built, as it were, back to front, facing east instead of west. So we look at the back of the church, but that corner nonetheless is really the 100% corner. And that is the place where, early in the process, there was agreement that whatever we build needs to be welcoming, not only to the church, but to the unchurched as well. This is a place which is unthreatening, which probably has something for the community that can be helpful. And so we need to capitalize on the visibility of that corner. And we haven't got to the architecture yet. The diagram you've seen with a little sketch on the back shows really the sort of general massing. And quite properly, the building which has both the Grace Institute and the housing in it is just ghosted in. The building is not designed yet. That's the envelope within which the building will exist. And so what it demonstrates is that, yes, it's on the south, on the west side. The south side is open to the sun. In the afternoon, the sun will come over the top of that building, and the breakout on the top floor will admit more sun into the courtyard. You'll see a red line between the church and the parish hall on one side and the new building on the other. That is purely a legal demarcation. The space is one space between the parish hall and the new building, between the church and the new building. It's a space which is very nearly as wide as the existing courtyard out here. So it's a usable space. And on the southeast corner, you will see some parking space there. Now, that's quite a flexible space. It could, for example, support a big tent or something during art camp if we need more covered space. So It's parking from day to day, but there are opportunities to use it for other things. It could be temporarily enclosed for some other open air activity, for example. But it's one of the advantages, I think, of the design we now have is that there's a great deal of flexibility in how the space can be used. I think those are the main points to be made. But if there are any questions that you may have, I can perhaps answer them. Not questions on the finance and all that stuff. Kevin will fill you in on that, I think. But if there's anything on the physical aspects, yes.
I was wondering if we're going to take the opportunity to do updates for this building, because there's a lot of deferred maintenance or potential maintenance that could make it easier to use.
May I go ahead and talk about? Eventually, yes.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a part of what we're discussing today, but the idea is yes. In particular, we want to look at alternative ways to give handicapped access to all of the spaces on the lower floor, as well as to this floor. We've talked about elevators in the past. That's certainly a possibility. We may now also have the opportunity of using a ramp system, which of course is much lower maintenance and is much easier to use. So we're going to look at that in some detail and see what we can do there.
But at a later phase, it won't be part of this initial.
Well, the ramping part may be. I think it'll all be looked at concurrently, because if we have to go through design review and code review and so forth, it's more efficient to do it all in one go, so we can do that. Any other questions? Yes.
Where the property line is there like is there a sidewalk that brings you into it where you can go into Grace as well as come around to the courtyard and come to the church?
The red line is a little bit like the equator. It exists on maps, but you can't see it. So it'll be invisible to all intents and purposes.
But I think Gwen is asking, right, about whether there'll be, like right now, there's no sidewalk that runs north to south between the buildings.
Oh, I see.
Yes, that's what I'm talking, thank
Yeah.
you, Angela, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yes.
think the point is, there very well could be like,
Yes.
this is an definitive on something.
Exactly. This is not a design. This is a diagram of how we're going to proceed with the architecture and the landscape architecture.
Please, I do not mean to be stepping on your toes, so
You won't.
please tell me to shut up if I need to. If you look at this side, and you look at the right-hand diagram, you can see where the church is. And you can see the bluer thing, that's the NHA building. If you look between those, that's the space. So yes, it's going to be a walkway, there'll be it'll be designed in a way that we can totally use that space. The space between the church and Grace Institute, I think it says right there, I'm looking at it, it's like 12 feet 7 inches between the church. And then if you look at between the existing parish hall and the housing, that is more, I can't read that, but it seems to me that's more like, what, 25 feet maybe? I can't.
49. It's 19 feet 8 inches past 12 feet 7
Okay,
inches.
so that's plenty of space there. So that's what, this is simply an example, but yes, there will be plenty of space to walk. And if you look at the space between, see where the existing parish hall is, and just south of that is where the parking lot is. That space is
18 feet and 8 inches.
okay. So it's quite a lot of space.
Thank you. It may be that we're done, and I need to hand back to Kevin anyway. Any more questions? Kevin will answer them much better than I do.
Now, Destin Verdun was supposed to be here, but he got the stomach flu yesterday, and he said he was worse today, I texted him back and said, we'd rather you stay home. So he said he would be happy to come back here and answer any questions that we have. But Nancy, he did email us and he gave us some pointers, and so I'm gonna go ahead and share those if that's okay. Find it here.
Maybe ask for questions after each one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so here we go. I don't have, this quoting from Destin. I don't have a ton to share that you already don't know about, but here are some bullet points you may want to share. One, NHA, Northwest Housing Alliance, is eager to partner on the housing and church facilities. Okay? And it supports the selected plan, option A. The primary funding we need to apply for is not available in 2024, so it's not available this year. The earliest we would apply for the primary funding would be January to February 2025, so a year from now. Any questions? I'll just keep reading then. With the award coming in June of 2025. So we would apply for the funding in January to February of 2025, and it would be awarded in 2025 in June. Typically,
Kevin?
yes.
People kind of get confused sometimes and they think that we're funding this or that somehow we're involved in that, but we completely aren't. NHA applies for the funding, secures the funding, spends the funding, builds the apartments.
Yes, and the beauty of any plans that we do on this grace part is if we do it all at the same time, there's obviously savings to be had because we're working at it together. Okay, so moving right along with Destin's points, the award would happen in, funding would happen in June of 2025. Typically, construction would start 14 months later and would take between 14 and 18 months to complete. Okay, all right, and again, Destin is going to come at our next meeting and be happy to answer any questions. The state's new funding structure and delivery is entirely new and to be announced in April of this year. There are some promising hints that the funds will be more supportive and flexible in their service to our desired populations of artists, people with intellectual disabilities, and young families. We anticipate doing some early and preliminary design after the state of Oregon releases information about their priorities in April and May, before the end of the year. We will be looking to further input from the congregation during that time. So, any other questions? Yes, Gwen.
That all sounds really great. Regarding the permitting and approval process, will there be public hearings associated with the redevelopment? What's this approved?
Public hearings with, you mean with us?
Right, yeah, the surrounding neighborhood.
Yes.
That's part of the process.
Yes.
Okay, so my question also is there expected or an opportunity that Grace as a whole submit an endorsement, or people come to the public hearing to say, this is great, we'd like to see this happen? All of that will probably unfold organically.
Yes, yes, and these are all questions that I can say yes to, but Destin can answer more clearly. So, and I wish he was here, but I'm happy he's where he is.
Kevin, if you like, I can respond to that.
Yes, please.
If we're talking about a public hearing, an official public hearing. Thank you. If we're talking about an official public hearing, I think, so far as I know, the only requirement is that we do fall within a design review zone, so it may go to the design commission, in which case there will be an opportunity to make a presentation to the design commission. typically one of us would do that and we'd speak in favor and why we think it's a good idea. It's possible that somebody will complain. It will be about either height or parking. And we will rebut whatever those objections might be. But it's unlikely to be a big deal, to be honest.
Andrew?
I wonder if it's just worth mentioning, we have been in touch with the neighborhood association, and generally they've been supportive.
Yes.
Right, so that's been very promising.
So I'm just gonna give, this is all the best case scenario that's been presented to you. And I know you guys all remember what we said, and then when it doesn't happen, you're like. So I'll tell you what some other things might be that would happen that would change. So once we get the guidance from the city, once NHA gets that, and we get more plans, then we'll go to the city and have an early assistance meeting with all sections of the city. And they'll come with their notebooks that are this thick, with all the code stuff. And there could be things that they decide to enforce or not. So it could change. I mean, the design could change. We don't know if this will pass. Am I right? I think I'm right. Am I right, Patty?
You are indeed.
Okay. The other thing is that there's hasn't been a lot of affordable housing built these last couple of years, even though our governor said she was going to build it all over the place. And so there's a lot of pent-up demand for this money that they don't have this year. So that means there'll be more demand next year, besides all the pent-up demand for this year. And it may take a couple of years before we get funding. And that would set us back a year. Okay, so none of these things are in our hands. But I have always had this theory in life that you're bound to get lucky from time to time. And I feel like we have had all of our bad luck. And now we're gonna get lucky.
There are just a couple of other things I want to point out. If you look at the underneath the diagram on the left, you see the unit count at the bottom, and it's just interesting to me. And I've seen this. I've been looking at this for weeks, so I know what's on here. But if you look there, it says, what does it say? Is that, I can't read that. Is that 63 or 50? I think it's 53 one-bedroom units and 24 two-bedroom units for a total of 77. So that's just very exciting to see how that is playing out. So when we talk about families, we really do mean families. So Marcia, you had a question?
No, I think I'm getting it answered over here, thank you.
Okay, all right. Someone else had Skylar.
Maybe another people will have the same question, so you can answer.
Yeah, I was wondering about our future arrangement with Fame.
Well, I don't, Martin can probably answer that better than me. I know we currently have an agreement with them, which we are going to be getting a new one. So Martin.
Yeah, much as we're hoping to create a new building, Fame is hoping to create a new building. So if they are successful in a capital campaign, they will renovate an existing space and move to that new space. This is sort of the same as Nancy's questions about the future, right? Like, once you get permitting and funding into the next, like, when would that be? Could it be a year and a half? I suppose it could be as early as that. So one of the things we'll turn our attention to at that point is the stewardship of the campus in the shorter and nearer term. So if indeed Fame is successful and moves on, then the question is, what do you do with the campus? In many ways, Fame was an ideal partner because in the current model, Grace Institute is most active in the summertime, and FAME was active or is active in the school year. So they just dovetail together beautifully. So if we were to look for a new partner, we would want one that was similar in nature, was school year driven. Another alternative is that Grace Institute decides it wants to expand dramatically into a year-round operation. That's an exciting possibility if it were to happen. So yeah, as with when are we going to break ground, there's quite a bit of calculated guessing going on. Hello, Phoebe.
Hi. I think there was talk of having at least some living spaces that were in a new building that would be designated to Grace. Is that gone, or does that still exist?
Well, that's a thing we got to haggle about with, I mean, it's all about money, right? But we would very much like to have a scenario in which we continue to have staff and clergy housing, whether it's here or somewhere else. It's one of the things we learned recruiting Dan Carlson, and then more recently Laura Halsey, is enormously powerful to be able to say to, especially in an expensive city, to be able to say, hey, guess what, we can house you. So regardless, that's certainly a goal, to continue to have housing, whether it's here or somewhere else. There's a question over there.
Yeah, I got two separate questions. One is, with funding, have we thought about the new development with the Lloyd Center? With their development program, it's quite possible, and in fact likely, that they're going to look for offsets for affordable housing. And so that might be an avenue of support that we could look at. And so that's the thing I would recommend. We have it. And then the second thing is, well, it escaped my mind, but I'm sure.
Oh, I know all about that, yeah. Patty is nodding thoughtfully to your first question. I think that's well worth exploring. Nancy, you had a thought?
So back in the olden days, we actually looked at that. It was one of the things we looked at, because they do have to have offset housing. I don't know how that would work, because that wouldn't be a role that NHA would play, and they've been our partners for so long that, I don't know, I'm pretty committed to them being our partners.
I don't understand what that means.
Okay, if you have offset housing, the developer of the apartments builds affordable housing somewhere else
Yes.
to offset it. Well, NHA isn't going to be building market rate housing in the Lloyd Center area.
It's my understanding that they can provide funding to NHA to build on their behalf. That's just a conversation at the neighborhood association.
I think that's correct. And that would be a good question for Destin when he comes.
Yeah, let's find out what Destin says.
Absolutely, thank you.
You know, going back to some time ago, there was another question that AJ thought. You got the 77 apartments. So my sense is a connection with FAME is that potentially, I know it's going to be competitive by application, but some of the people who are involved in FAME could become occupants, residents in this new development, conceivably.
Yeah, so yeah, the question is, could a FAME student or FAME artist be a resident? Absolutely, they could. I'm talking out of my ear here. This is so far beyond my expertise, but my understanding is we would not be able to say we've reserved a certain number of units for FAME residents, but we would be able to let FAME know that the facility was becoming available, and it's a big advantage to get your application in early. That something like that would be permissible. So yeah, it's very possible that that a FAME artist or student would live here, which would be very cool.
No preference, but as Kathy was saying, if meeting the qualifications in a competitive process, they could potentially become residents.
Big time, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Qualifications.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be very exciting to think about continuing the partnership in that in that new way, and certainly would respond to a very urgent need indeed. I know a great many families at FAME are navigating it's a perennial question for an adult with an intellectual and developmental disability is if life takes its most likely course and I outlive my parent, what happens then? Because I continue to need some help. And this is potentially an exciting answer to that question.
And I'm going to read this bullet point again, because all those bullet points came through, and I don't expect you to have taken them in. Just read it again. There are some promising hints. This is from Destin. There are some promising hints that the funds will be more supportive and flexible in their service to our desired population. So what Grace has said, our desired population would be of artists, people with intellectual disabilities, and young families. So yes, we can continue to talk to him, and why not give them a first chance?
So I think Destin tells this story about the Ethiopian community. Do you remember this, Andrew?
Only vaguely.
Yeah.
And they drive around and they check all the things that are being built to find out what's affordable housing. And then they keep very close track of that, and they're the first ones with their applications in. So we can affect who lives next door by, maybe we help them with the applications. We send out word in the art community, and when it opens up, the applications are there, because they have to take those on a first come, first served basis. They can't go, well, we like this person better than that person. Am I right? Yeah. So we can affect it. We just have to, when it gets closer and we kind of know what we're doing, we could maybe have a day or 2 days and we help people and invite them to come fill out the application. Laura?
Is this something that can be shared outside of the Grace community, like with the city or the neighborhood association, or can we share what we have so far?
Yeah.
I think that's right. Let's just talk about how to be strategic about that. Because yes, as someone said earlier, it's a wonderfully supportive relationship, and it's just worth holding on to that.
Just let me know.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Phoebe?
I'm looking at the property line on 16 there, is that still, and I remember that there was this cut, right? Easement, thank you. Has that been resolved, or is that still in?
That hasn't been resolved, but Destin has talked to the city, and they are willing to just move it along and give it back to us. And if we get that done, it would give us 5 more feet between the buildings, which I think it's going to all be part of when we go in for early assistance. We'll know more.
Hey, I just thought that, I was wondering about that same thing, 'cause I thought it had to be approved by everybody that lives in the area, and then as soon as they heard the term affordable housing, they all decided, no.
Destin talked to his contacts at the city, and they said pretty much that we could skip that process. I mean, it's not in writing, so it's one of those things that they're saying, don't worry about it, because they want affordable housing. They're not going to let one person's problem stand in their way. Yes?
Yes. I'm curious if you could define what affordable means.
Yeah.
I can do that, Nancy. There are several classes of affordable housing, but basically it's based on mean income in the community. And if you earn 60% of the mean income, then you qualify for a certain kind of affordable housing. If you earn 30% or less, you qualify for a more generous form of affordable housing. But it's always tied to the average income that people have and a fraction of that. So that's how it works.
Am I right, Patty and Nancy, that Destin has told us that he thinks will be most successful, they will be most successful in getting funding if they aim for the 30%. Is that correct?
That's usually the case, yes.
Yeah.
But it sounds like if Kevin wanted to read Destin's point, when I called him the other day, he said that they're broadening that. We don't know the rules yet, but it sounds like they're gonna include more families, and let us, take it out from just the 30%. Because the 60% become the 30%, and he's optimistic, but he said so far, the city hasn't given him a lot of confidence to be optimistic, but I'm hopeful.
I read somewhere in maybe the Oregonian, some article about how building any kind of housing helps the situation because the people that are in the low rent places, they want to move up to the next level. So they're occupying, they might be able, when they come to where they can afford a better place, they want to move, and that frees up what they're living in.
You're exactly right.
That's
And traditionally, we never built affordable housing. Traditionally, what happened was we kept building new housing, and little by little, it moved down the expense scale until it became a rental, and the rental was less expensive, and so forth. And that's how we solved the problem. But we stopped doing that principally in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. We virtually stopped building housing altogether because the profit went out of it. And so now we've got this huge backlog. We're not alone. Most of Europe is in the same boat. And so any sort of housing is added, even high-end stuff, all helps. But you're exactly right. But what we have to do now is to compensate for the fact that we have a shortfall of, estimates vary, but probably about 300,000 units. The only way we can address that without having more people camping on the sidewalk is to build subsidized housing, which is what affordable housing really is.
Now I'm going to wrap this up because you know how I am. I don't want our meetings to go long. If you look at looking at the, this one right here, look at the parking lot. Do you see there's some red arrows? That is for Grace Art Camp. So during Grace Art Camp, we'll just make sure that there's no cars in there, and then parents can drive in there, drop their kids off, and then come out. So it's a way to address certain issues that you have when all of a sudden you've got 120 kids coming. So I'm just pointing out the things that I've noticed, and you can keep looking at it, and there will be many more opportunities for you to talk about this. Destin said he'd be happy to come to the next meeting, so I'm definitely going to have him do that and bring your questions. I hope what you've learned today is that this project is not dead. It is still moving along, and thank you to Nancy for pushing and keeping this up. And Yetunde.
I just want to say that when we close up, can I have 2 people volunteer to help me do the dishes in the kitchen? Thank you so much.
Yes.
Just a quick question. At one time we talked about parking, that there's a parking garage across the street. Are we still in dialogue with those people? At the bank? Yeah.
We will be, yes.
Yeah, because that'd be a pretty good thing.
Okay, folks. Yes, Sally? Go home.